They're ready. They're quiet. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Bexley Public Library. Okay. I'm Ben Heckman, Library Director, and I'm so glad you could join us on a wonderful night. I mean, look at this hometown crowd celebrating a hometown author. This is truly a wonderful night, and I'm so glad to have Marty Ross-Dolen here for tonight's talk. I want to give a big thank you to our friends at the Gramercy Books for partnering with us on this event. It's always a joy to team up and bring meaningful, engaging programs just like this one to our community, right across the street, besties. They laugh. I don't know. Yeah. Before we dive in, I just want to say this Friday from 6 to 8, we're hosting the Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Festival in the parking lot. The weather's going to be beautiful, so I hope you'll come and join us. We're doing that in partnership with the Bexley Minority Parent Alliance, Bexley DEI, Bexley Community Foundation, and One Bexley. It's always a fantastic evening, so hope you'll join us. And now I'm delighted to hand things over to Linda Cass, founder and owner of Gramercy Books, who will introduce tonight's special guests, Marty Ross-Dolen and Lee Martin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. Well, I'd like to also welcome everyone and thank the Bexley Library, because the Bexley Library is just fantastic, and we love partnering with you. Welcome to our live streamed audience as well. And we are just so thrilled to feature Marty Ross-Dolen tonight, celebrating the book launch of Always There, Always Gone. And to learn more about the extraordinary story she shares, Marty's going to be in conversation with novelist, memoirist, and Ohio State University English professor Lee Martin, who we're equally delighted to have join us this evening. So. So to preview the next hour, Marty and Lee will be talking for about 40 minutes. Marty may be reading a little from her memoir, and then there'll be time for your questions, and we'll run around and give you the mic and ask some questions of Marty after the conversation. And if I could share just a few quickly some upcoming Gramercy programs and encourage you to go on our website. All the programs right now are listed through August, GramercyBooksBexley.com. And we've got a lot of them. So on the 29th of May, we're going to be back right here partnering with the Bexley Library again. We're holding an event to launch a book called The Art Spy by journalist Michelle Young, who tells the true saga of World War II curator of the Jeu de Paume Museum during World War II. And Nanette Macy-Junes is going to be in conversation with her. Nanette is the emerita director of the Columbus Museum of Art. On June 3rd, we have a book club that we're going to be discussing, the Titanic Survivors Book Club, and we have the author joining us virtually, and Christopher Purdy in conversation and leading the discussion. On June 10th, we have an award-winning writer, Lainey Katz-Becker, and she wrote a book, In the Family Way. She'll be in conversation with Denison University's Margot Singer, and we're going to be taken back into the mid-60s when women are on the cusp of liberation. And finally, on June 15th at 4 at the bookstore, a debut author, big buzz around this book, Great Black Hope by Rob Franklin. He'll be in conversation with Hanif Abdurraqib. So that's going to be a great afternoon. It's a Sunday, June 15th. So now let's get on to the program. In her debut memoir, Marty Ross-Dolen tells a mother-daughter story of multi-generational trauma, grief, discovery, and love, with the backdrops of a historic American tragedy and an iconic family business. Marty is a graduate of Wellesley College and Albert Einstein College of Medicine and is a retired child and adolescent psychiatrist. She holds an MFA in writing from Vermont College of Fine Arts, and prior to her time at Vermont College of Fine Arts, she participated in graduate-level workshops at The Ohio State University. Her essays have appeared in North Dakota Quarterly, Red Divider, Lilith, Willow Review, and the Brevity blog, among others. Her essay entitled Diphtheria was named a notable essay in the Best American Essays series, and as we all know, Marty lives in Columbus. Lee Martin is the Pulitzer Prize finalist, author of The Bright Forever and the recently released The Evening Shades, plus 6 additional novels. He has also published 3 memoirs, 2 short story collections, in addition to his craft book, Telling Stories. His fiction and nonfiction have appeared in Harper's, Ms., The Best American Essays, The Best American Mystery Stories, Creative Nonfiction, The Georgia Review, and The Kenyon Review, among others. He's the winner of the Mary McCarthy Prize in Short Fiction and fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Ohio Arts Council. A native Midwesterner, Lee teaches in the MFA program at The Ohio State University. So a warm, warm welcome to both Marty Ross-Dolen and Lee Martin. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Bexley Public Library. Thank you, Gramercy Books. Thank all of you for being here tonight. Before we begin, I believe Marty has a word or two she'd like to say.
I want to say the same thank you. Thank you to Gramercy Books. Thank you to Linda Cass for being a friend before, during, and after my publishing journey, and a fellow She Writes Press author. Thank you to the booksellers. There's nothing better than walking into Gramercy and being greeted. It's my favorite thing about entering the bookstore. So thank you. Thank you to the Bexley Public Library. Thank you, Paige Bellata, for making all of this possible. I've been to a lot of author readings and discussions in the audience over the last 20 years. Each time I imagined being on this stage, I will admit, in my fantasy, there were about 2 or 3 rows that were filled. This was not part of it, but I'm so, so grateful to you for all being here. It makes me feel very humbled and very grateful. And to Lee, who in his own way has a part of my story. I'm so grateful to have you here, an amazing author and a brilliant writer and a great friend. So thank you all. And Lee has this thing. Zach, I may ask if we could do the lights once. Lee taught me in his last book thing to take a picture of you all, perhaps holding up your book, because it's a very cool picture. But wait one sec. I didn't realize you'd get so dark. Okay. Smile. Let me do this, a 0.5 that I learned. Thank you. Thank you.
Before Marty and I started our conversation, I thought I'd throw out just a few things to you to see what it does. What if I said hidden objects? What if I said the timber toes? What if I said goofus and gallant? Does that bring anything to mind? Something like Highlights for Children magazine that we all read in the doctor's and dentist's offices and got really angry when other kids had already circled the hidden objects? Well, as many of you probably know, it's thanks to Marty's grandparents that we have that magazine. Still going strong today. 78 years? Wow. Marty, thank you so much for this gorgeous memoir. Could you talk just a little bit about the story of writing this book?
Sure. It's a 14-year story, and that's only a part of it. So, as a summary, my grandparents in 1960 were killed in an airplane accident, a collision over New York City. They were traveling from Columbus, Ohio to New York to try to meet with people to have the magazine placed on the book stands, the book newsstands. And at the time, my mom was 14, and she was one of 5 kids. My book is the story of being raised by a mother in protracted mourning. It's also the story of my grandmother, I am her namesake. And my mom had, as the archivist for Highlights, had started accumulating her letters, her personal letters, other artifacts, photographs, and I accumulated them in my basement. And so I knew that I had a story to tell through both the incident, my family, and all of these artifacts, that I could ultimately tell a story about myself, my mother, and her. What happened in December of 2010, it was the 50th anniversary of the airplane accident, and a cemetery in Brooklyn decided to hold a 50th anniversary memorial event. And I attended that event, and that is where I started writing, so that's why it's been about 14 years since the book started. I wrote an essay, and I had the opportunity to take part in a couple of Lee's workshops at Ohio State, and I submitted the essay for feedback during the workshop. And at the end of my first semester, I will never forget this. I almost feel like it's the same situation because I was looking at you across the table. And Lee handed me at the end of the semester, he handed me my essay with some, writing in the margins, and said to me, "I wonder if you're writing a book." And I looked at him and my stomach sank. And I went home and I put the essay along with the other copies where other students had written comments in the margins, and I shoved it into a cabinet, and I didn't take it out for 10 years. And that's because I wanted to be done writing this story. If you have a tendency toward creative nonfiction and enjoy and use writing to process, I had wanted to have been done processing. However, then over those years, I was accumulating my grandmother's letters, and I did have this sort of thing in the back of my mind that I did have a book I had to write. So at the time of the pandemic in 2020, I enrolled in an MFA program, and it's there that I decided to take on this project. I wanted to get the MFA, I wanted to write the book. I had the time because of the pandemic, and I had all the materials, and so it was going to happen. And I had some phenomenal faculty advisors, one of whom is here today. And Ira Sukrangrung, who teaches at Kenyon and who could raise his hand, the book would not exist without Ira, I believe, certainly not in the form that it is. I'm so grateful to him and so grateful that he's here. And if any of you have read the book or flipped through it, you might notice the game show. And thank goodness, because that was Ira's idea. So that's basically the story, and here we are.
And it was a long time coming.
It was a long time coming.
But your readers are very glad that you finally opened that cabinet. Now, did you start reading your grandmother's letters before working on the book in earnest? Was that part of your process?
So the letters were very overwhelming to me. There were hundreds of letters. There are hundreds of letters. There are thousands of pages of reading. And it was very hard for me to imagine how I was going to take these letters, which I found fascinating, and make them in any way of interest to anybody else. And so I knew that I wanted to, so I just would go and pick out a few letters and read them and just see what they said and see if I could get a spark from them. But it wasn't until I started my writing program that I brought everything upstairs and covered my dining room table and just started reading in earnest every single page. And then that is what then helped me propel the writing of the book forward.
So did you read through all the letters before you started writing?
I read them while I was writing because a chunk of the book is not about my grandmother or the letters. So it's also about myself and my mom, and those I didn't depend on the letters, those sections, to write. So it was a part of it, but not the full part.
Well, I always find it interesting to balance the research with the writing.
Yeah.
Because the research can be seductive.
Yeah.
It can convince you that you're writing when really you're reading, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how did you find that balance between writing and doing the research?
I think what would happen is I would read, I'd say, I'm gonna get through these, these years, the college years, or these, late 50s, or whatever period. And I would read, and I would search in the process for the parts of the particular letters that had something that I felt could speak to my story. And so it was sort of a twofold thing. I was searching for what I wanted in the book, and I was finding what would become the book. And so I will say that there were parts when I really was at a loss for how to incorporate letters, I would and felt rather paralyzed by the sheer volume. I would take a letter that spoke to me, and I would put it sort of standing up next to my laptop, and I'd just start to transcribe and just type the letter, thinking, well, maybe this will go in the book, maybe it won't. But what happened as I did that was that I started to really incorporate her voice into my own mind. And I found myself feeling more and more like I knew her, and that I could even speak to her. And what ended up happening as I was doing that is that I started entering into the scene. And so, totally as a surprise to myself, I would just start talking to her. And so all of a sudden, I'm transcribing a letter, and I'm also writing within the letter. And while I was doing that, it was really fun, and it was, but I didn't know what I was gonna do with it. And at the time, my advisor, I was sending these packets every month, and I sent the packet of some transcribed letters with my entering these scenes, and he said, this is interesting, I don't know if it will end up in the book. And I thought to myself, it's actually the most important part of the book. And so I did it, and then my next advisor was Ira, who I worked for 2 semesters, for a year. And I gave Ira this material thinking he's gonna say, I don't know if this works. Ira said, I want more of this. And so that ended up being the fun part. My book was really painful to write, and it was the fun part. So I looked for those opportunities. I was very excited when I would find them, and it would lift my spirits. But I just also realized that this was my access to my grandmother, and I knew her, and I really felt like I knew her. In memoir, you're not supposed to write fiction in memoir. So how do you make sense of doing that and doing what I was doing? And really, you would call it speculative writing. And my way of managing that was just to make sure that the reader knew that I wasn't convinced that this was true, that this was material from my imagination, but that it still fit.
So this would be a really good place if you wouldn't mind reading a little bit from the book.
Sure.
That'd be really great.
Sure. I'm going to read. I have this reading. I'd like to read. My book is fragmented. It's sort of called an experimental memoir, and it's fragmented, meaning that the chapters are short. Sometimes they're super short. Sometimes they're a few pages. At the beginning, I call them wisps, like they are ways of just things to think about. I'm sort of a minimalist writer, so I like to sort of use as few words to convey, and so they started to feel like wisps to me. So one wisp I'm going to read first, just because I want you to know where the title comes from. And then I'm going to share a story in one fragment, and then a letter in response to the story. So the first is called Lungs of the Earth. Sometimes memories, the less clear ones, the ones we feel more than see, are like ocean waves. They roar and roll, drive forward into silence, peak, crest, suck, curl into themselves, recede. Positive pressure, negative pressure, positive pressure, negative pressure, breaths of salt water, lungs of the earth, impossible to catch and hold, filtering through the spaces between my fingers like water thickened with sand, equal parts solid and liquid, always there, always gone, all at once. This is a story. It's a true story. And this reflects my time when I was probably 4, and I lived with this story, called Shaved Fur. My favorite teddy bear, the one I slept with every night, was also my mother's when she was a child. He was a floppy panda bear with a music box inside and a limp piece of white ribbon encircling his neck. Sections of matted fur, white on his arms and legs and black on his chest, had been shaved, leaving flat, rough material underneath. Each night, with one wind of a silver metal key attached to his back, he played a lullaby of twinkling bells, lulling me to sleep with our heads sharing a pillow. "Tell me again what happened to my bear," I asked my mother, my fingers rubbing the hairless sections of his body. I knew she could repeat this story without the threat of tears because she still felt irritated enough about this violated toy to muster control. He was a birthday present from my parents, and he was soft and had the most beautiful white bow around his neck, she said, chuckling and holding him, comparing the image of when she first received him to his current weary state. She told of her younger brother, almost 4-year-old Freddie, who, with his friend, snuck into her empty room, took the bear from where he sat on her bed, and shaved sections of his fur with their father's hair clippers. I discovered the scene when I went into my room, black and white fur in piles on the floor next to my shaved bear. I was so upset, and my mother was very angry with Freddie too, and she punished him. There was pride in her voice, even as an adult, to know that her younger brother got what was coming. I collected the fur in a little bag and kept it in a box. I hugged my teddy bear, also feeling angry on his behalf, but loving that he had belonged to my mother as a child and was rescued from my mischievous uncle. I imagine my grandmother's anger was for my sake too, as if she knew that I, her granddaughter, would also love this bear one day, an invisible string that connects us through the body of an imperfect toy. And still, he sits on my shelf, even now, far more worn, with a chewed nose and a broken music box, smelling of tight hugs and shaved fur. So part of my search within the letters was for things that maybe I recognized. And I came across this letter. You can't see, but it's written on vintage highlights letterhead. It's called My Bear. This was written by my grandmother. Dear Mother and Daddy, dated November 1st, 1956. And mind you, the previous one I read was, I was 4, that story I've known my whole life. Now I'm learning this 55 years later. Dear Mother and Daddy, Freddie and David were the worst today. It was an OSU game, and we had a sitter. These 2 little ones got Gary's hair clippers and gave each other haircuts. This was kind of funny until we discovered that they had shaved Patsy's panda with a musical box inside it that she has been guarding with her life for 5 years. She hasn't even slept with it for fear of messing it up. She looked like a mother who just saw her baby eaten alive by a tiger. But she regained her composure quickly and has accepted it very beautifully as one of those things we put up with about Freddie. Love for now, Mary.
Oh, that Freddie. Wow. Tell us about your grandmother.
So I grew up knowing that she was an extraordinary person because my mother always told me these things about her. But reading the letters, I know it even more. She was hilarious. She's witty, funny, very smart, very, very, very in love with her husband, very in love with her children, very in love with her work, passionate. She was a writer. There are a couple of references to her wishing, getting back to her book and writing another chapter. So she was born and raised in Virginia. She spent three of her most precious summers at Interlochen in Michigan, trying to play the violin. And there's sections that's a lot of my letters are from Interlochen. And then she went to college at Radcliffe and had wonderful friends and had lots of blind dates and first dates and grew up, went through what everybody went through in the 20th century around World War II and just all of the things that people experienced in the 1950s. I consider her somebody that I know and somebody who is pretty extraordinary.
There's a section in the book, the game show section, where
Thanks to Ira.
she sort of, your grandmother sort of considers her various options when it comes to bows, right?
Yeah. Part of the reason that I write this is, we write our obsessions. And I have some obsession. One of my obsessions around this book is this idea of destiny and the decisions that we make that we don't realize that we're making that determine things about our lives. And I wonder, had she chosen a different suitor, would she have lived a longer life? And so one of the things that my mom found that she had left, is this black box that's sort of a shallow box, and in it are all these letters. And they're the letters of 3 suitors, including my grandfather, from a period of the summer of 1941 until probably to the end of 1941, but included Pearl Harbor in December. Anyway, this one suitor was a sailor in the Navy. One suitor was a co-ed friend that he went to Harvard. They were friends. And then there was my grandfather, who was a student at MIT, and they had been set up on a blind date. And she kept all their letters. It's funny because, I myself, I have to admit, I've thrown away all my letters from old boyfriends. and also, people have the reaction of, why does she keep those letters? That's not cool. She was married. Like, thank God she kept those letters. They're so precious. They're brilliant. And they're fascinating because these men had stories beyond these letters that I was able to learn about on the internet. And I was able to discover what their lives, and both of them lived long lives, besides my grandfather. So anyway, I was writing these and including the letters, and I felt how boring it was. And Ira said, this feels like a dating, remember the dating game or the dating? It's like, yeah, but that feels like a little weird to put into the book, to put it. And I just stewed on it for a while until probably the middle of the night, because that's when most things happen. I realized what I needed to do was write a television script to be able to sort of present it as if it's a game show. And we worked hard on that. I would say, this needs to be a little more kitschy, a little more campy. Like, it's not, and I would throw something else in. Anyway, so it was a fun way to write it and challenging way to write it. But yeah, it depicts that time.
So Marty, I'm curious, did you ever entertain the thought of just writing a linear memoir chronologically? Did you ever do that? Or did you always know that it was going to be this fragmented memoir?
So I was stuck with the thought that I had to write a linear memoir. It didn't work. It wouldn't have worked because it's 3 lives over 3 different periods of time, and they were so intertwined. And how was I going to do that in a linear way, really? So I knew that I felt like I had to go back and forth. It does have a chronological movement over the course of the book, but it is a lot of in and out of time. But I didn't know that that was an option until I started reading other people's work that had done that. And thank goodness for those other, because they are what made me realize that I had no restrictions. You don't have to have constraints. And memories don't happen chronologically. We don't think back about time in our lives like, okay, now I have to start at age 2, and I can't think about 4, because we don't do that. Memories are, whenever they are, is when they are. And time is like, I have Abigail Thomas, a writing friend, brilliant writer, talks about time being like one of these things. What's that kind of instrument? Accordion, thank you. Thank you. That it compresses and then it expands and compresses and expands. And that's how I felt while I was writing my book too. So once I decided that I didn't have the constraints of just a chronological narrative, that's when my opportunities opened up.
So let's talk a little bit about erasure. Can you say a few words about how you used erasure in the writing of the memoir, particularly when it comes to your grandmother's letters?
So this is another thing that happened when I was just playing and experimenting because I couldn't figure out how to write. And I also had another sort of magical thought. What if she actually is writing about me in there? What if she has a message for me? I know that that's not real, but when you're in this space, these sort of ideas come. And so I decided I was going to create messages for me. So I took some letters and I color Xeroxed them, and I just started taking a Sharpie to them. I would circle some words that just spoke to me for some reason. I would search for ways that they could become messages or sentences. And it was like my own highlights arts and craft project. That's how it felt. My table was covered, and then I realized that, and I wanted these in the book, and so this is erasure poetry. And then it started to, as I was learning more and more about memoir in my program and learning about the fact that I was going to have to be very selective about what I included in my book. You can't write about 3 lives without cutting stuff out. And so I started to realize that in some ways the erasure poetry was almost a metaphor for my memoir. And then I looked up definitions. Erasure, the erasure of something is the removal of something. But it's also the removal of someone. And it's this idea that people who are gone don't exist. They exist in memories, but they don't exist sort of for others to know. And I didn't like that idea. Like, I was in the process of trying to bring someone back to life. And so I then looked at the definition of erasure poetry, which I was already creating. And the definition of erasure poetry is removing. Erasure poetry can be any document that you can think of and just taking a marker and finding something else in it. And that's essentially the definition of erasure poetry, taking something that exists, removing something, creating something new. And that's what memoir is, because memoir is taking lives or life, keeping some parts, picking and choosing, taking other parts out, and then creating something new. And so it worked. It propelled me through as I was creating these poems.
Marty, I could go on and on talking to you, but I'd love to hear you read
another piece. Okay.
From the book.
Okay, I'm going to read another brief letter, and then the section after that. The brief letter is called Grandma's. It's dated May 25th, 1944, from Mary to her mom. Dear Mother, I waited until I was pretty sure you were home to write, I heard the news Monday afternoon. I had been thinking of Grandma, wishing I knew how she baked those wonderful cookies. You know, Grandma cookies. I'm awfully glad I have nothing but the pleasantest memories of Grandma, the old house in St. Charles and the cherry tree there, the cookies and noodles she made, Winterset with the ball games and swimming pool, and all the folks that used to gather there, and the farm, and home hour every noon. All those things, plus the trips to and from Iowa, are the memories I have of Grandma. I'm going to miss having a grandma. Love, Mary. Digging through the treasure, I find jewels like these. My grandmother knew what it meant to have a grandma. This means she would have known how to be one. Spin me down. In this letter of sympathy from my grandmother to her mother, my grandmother mourns the loss of her own grandmother. I ask, where is the caboose on this grieving train? Car after car, track after track, the clickety-clack of metal wheels as they hit rail joints and squats, the hollow sound of an air whistle signaling another loss. No red caboose in sight. Generations and centuries chugging. But what about mitochondrial DNA? Could we concentrate less on our separate bodies and more on our common chemistry? This small circular chromosome, a tiny bracelet of 37 genes passed from mammalian mother to offspring, is critical to the energy production of cells, to survival, to life. For women, these genes are inherited virtually unchanged from grandmother to daughter to granddaughter. I send my saliva to a genetic testing company specifically to isolate my mitochondrial DNA. I'm curious about my matrilineal line, the ancient migration path trodden by the women that made me. But I also want to imagine the genes that existed in my grandmother's cells, the exact ones I carry in my cells, isolated in a lab, existing in the world on their own. Isn't this collection of nucleotides, this miraculous sequence of building blocks and bonds, bigger than any of us anyway? Double helices linked through time, polymerase chain reactions, test tubes, centrifuge, spin me down, down, down. Spin us all down until we are one.
Thank you, Marty. I have one last question before we open this up to questions from the audience. And you know I'm going to ask this question, and you promised me you had an answer. What did you learn from writing this memoir?
I learned from writing this memoir that multi-generational trauma is real. I didn't mention that I might get weepy, but I do have my Kleenex.
She told me she had Kleenex in case I got weepy.
You know, it's hard to rationalize feeling like you are the victim of trauma that comes multi-generations past, because you weren't the one who experienced it, the actual occurrence. But I believe, aside from what we do, we are learning about genetic, inheritance around around trauma. I also believe that it's largely dependent, on top of that, on the environment. And in my case, this accident took place at a time when people didn't talk. There was no language for grief and loss. And so I was raised with that lack of talking. And I believe that contributed to why this story has been dragging on me. And I as I've been sailing through life, and when I say sailing, I don't mean like everything has been smooth. I mean there's been rockiness, there's been choppiness. But I didn't realize that I was basically trudging through the floodwaters of trauma too. And when I was looking back and writing and remembering, I was finding those places where grief was hidden, where I wouldn't have acknowledged that or even known about it when I was thinking about those things in the past. We don't see through that lens all the time unless you're in the process of searching for it. So that's what I learned, that it's real, that I have grief too. And that's been a very important thing to know.
Absolutely, and I dare say that many of us probably don't realize how the past has affected us in the present and in the future. Thank you so much, Marty.
Thank you, Lee.
All right, we're ready for some questions from the audience. Right here.
Hi, Marty. Was there anything you really didn't want to write about in this memoir, but you kind of had to?
I have to think through the book. I will say that, okay, I'll say it this. I made the decision when I was writing this book that I was going to come at it from a place of love. And in doing that, it sort of helped me organize the ways that I thought about my story. And I could have written it from a place of sadness, and I could have written it from a place of anger, but that was a decision that I made. I made that decision after I had started writing. So there are sections that I wrote that aren't in the book. And I knew after I wrote them, oh, that's not going to go in there. And yet, I know that I would not have been able to move forward had I not written them. So I think that, I'm not sure if that answers the question, but the picking and choosing, when you are writing your story, just write everything, and then you later decide what angle you're going to take and what fits and what doesn't. But I will say, sometimes you have to write, and sometimes it's a lot of pages, so that you can take it out.
Did your kids have any influence on your writing?
My kids, who are here tonight, and I'm so grateful they're here from New York to be with their mom. My kids are the reason I wrote the book, because this story is one to carry through the generations in my family. And if I didn't have my kids, I don't know that I would have felt that I had as much of a purpose for writing it. So in that way, yes, and they've always been unbelievably supportive and tolerated my talking about it an awful lot.
What's the next topic, and when's the next book coming?
I keep saying one and done. This is it. And I am working on essays, and I'm relieved when I know that I'm not trying to attempt another book right now. I will say I have a lot of interest in the other side of my family, my father's side, which, and so I plan to start doing some digging there. And I don't know that it would end up as a book, but I'd like to write about it in some way.
I remember Joyce Carol Oates saying that after she finished a novel, all she wanted to do was go in her room with white walls and sit.
Yeah.
So there's your relief.
There, good, thank you.
Will you sign book back for us?
Say that again?
Will you sign?
I will after, yes.
Now that this book is out in the world for both you and your mother, has this been a healing experience? Can you talk about that a little bit?
100%, yeah. I don't, I'm a psychiatrist. I don't necessarily think of writing as therapy or therapeutic. It's a type, but I definitely see it as healing. And that to me was the whole magic of this. And it came out of the writing practice of writing what you what you know from your memories, and then being at the writer at the desk and exploring what you just wrote and bringing meaning to it. And when you do that, it's called reflective writing. When you do that reflective writing, you deepen your understanding of it and what you can offer the reader in terms of their understanding. And that reflective writing is very healing, because you look at your stories from a totally different perspective, and you find the spaces where maybe you're holding that anger or that sadness, and you find the spaces where people are just living their lives the way that they best know how, and you're not necessarily focused as much on how that impacted you as just having an understanding of what the world might have been like, or what their lives might have been like. So, and that has been a very healing process.
Marty, don't I remember you saying that during the research part, when you're reading all the letters, et cetera, that you and your mother would have phone conversations?
Yeah. So I'm sure that my mother's husband, John, also remembers this. It was a lot of letter reading day in and day out, and I would inevitably get on the phone with my mom and say, "Did you know this happened? Do you remember this?" And inevitably my mother would have additional information to provide to that particular story, or she'll fill in the cracks about things that don't make sense. And we laughed a lot, and we cried a lot. And it brought us, I'm not sure we could have been closer, but it brought us even closer. And that's been a precious part of this whole process.
How fortunate you were to have, or fortunate you are, to have these letters, to have your mother to talk to. So often when we write memoir, we don't have these artifacts, and the people that we're writing about are gone. So that was a great thing for you.
Right, and in saying that, I want to mention your book, Turning Bones, was the beginning of my realizing of how I could write without having to have every single fact and detail about the people I was writing about, because they weren't here anymore. And Turning Bones is a memoir that Lee wrote that is about his ancestors, but because there was limited information, he took the liberty to sort of tell their stories in a speculative kind of way. And that was the beginning of my realizing that that was a way that we could remember our past, the people in our past, ancestors that we didn't know, and give them life. And that Turning Bones set me on course.
So you're the one who read that book. I've been looking for you forever.
Everybody, I highly recommend Turning Bones. I recommend every book that you've written, of which there are many.
Are there any other questions from the audience? Back there.
I have a comment which has to do with the fact that I have a small suitcase, actually it's a hat box, in which the letters that my mother and grandmother exchanged when we lived in Europe for a year, and also when we were living in Connecticut and had moved away from Central Ohio. So listening to this has really inspired me to dig into that box. And I know that I've looked at some of the letters and have learned things about what was going on in my mother's head, and things about her relationship with my dad that I otherwise would not have known. I mean, not necessarily bad things, but so I really like the comment that you made about wanting somehow for people to get to know someone who is no longer around I'm sorry, I'm sort of breaking down, but I would really like for my kids to have known my grandmother, my mother's mother. And I know that they would really have a lot of positive emotion to share between the two of them. And the things that you said about generational trauma are really true. In my professional experience, people who have survived the Holocaust, for example, have passed on traits of difficulty trusting people, not wanting to share a lot of information about themselves, not the same kind of color palette that you might see in someone who hadn't experienced something as terrible as that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you. You said a couple of things that I would like to mention. Don't throw out the letters. Don't throw out the letters. Yeah, even though you've had them for years, don't throw them out, the ones in the attic, the ones in the basement, the ones that you find, because I know that sometimes they're just about the weather, but they're about the weather in a person's voice. And the voice is really almost more important than the content. And it's there. The voice is there. You can hear it. You can feel it. So, and a lot of people lament, isn't that so unfortunate that we no longer have letter writing? I personally feel like we're communicating through written word more than anybody ever did, between emails and texts. And human beings don't stop communicating by writing. They just don't. So don't throw out the emails. Don't throw out the texts. It's there. It's gold. You don't want to lose that gold. And in terms of inherited trauma, there's no question. The 20th, all of the centuries have had their fill of trauma. The 20th century we know because many of us lived during it, and many of us have close parents who lived during it. But world wars and Holocaust and other wars and just, micro tragedies and macro tragedies, and we're all sort of living and breathing them still. And we all have them, and we don't necessarily think about them. And I guess a couple of things that I do want to encourage is that people talk about, that they open this, give it oxygen, talk about it. Don't take away the opportunity to see them differently and to heal from it through talking, and certainly talk to your children.
Linda, we have a question up front here.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Marty. My question is, when you said at the beginning about you started the writing with a focus on love and not anger, and I'm wondering if you could speak more about that, because part of what sort of related to the trauma. So my maternal great-grandmother lived until I was 11, and she graduated from Bluefield State Teachers College in 1898. And when I asked her multiple times, and I asked her daughter, my grandmother, multiple times, what was slavery like? Because, of course, my great-grandmother's parents had been enslaved. Mm-hmm. And her standard response was, this is not something to talk about. Mm-hmm. And so it was not discussed. Mm-hmm. My paternal grandfather was born in Roanoke in 1891, and he lived until my first year at Wellesley in 1972. He left home when he was 14 and never mentioned mother, father, sister, brother. No one was allowed to say the word Virginia in his presence. So clearly trauma happened, but this thing about not talking about it, and I think it leads to residual anger that I saw both in my maternal grandmother and my mother. I saw in my paternal grandfather. My father lived as if we were in a constant state of siege. The sense that you are not safe. And I think that, not that there wasn't factual basis for that, but I think not talking about the traumas that have been experienced really contributes to that process. And I'm wondering how you got to the point of being able to hold on to the idea of love rather than anger.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Part of it is just having a solid understanding about that this was how humans responded at a time. I think, I mean, again, the trauma is vast. And I even think about the fact that children, when they were born, rarely, many children were dying of epidemics. People were living in lives where the people in their lives children didn't live. People's lives were, had shorter life expectancies. It just was always happening. And we don't live that way in the same kind of way that we think that our children are, So I just think it was all-consuming, and the only way to function and move forward was to just not give it oxygen. But to me, writing from a place of love, to me, means giving everybody in the story, in my story with this book, the generous, sort of my generosity of understanding that they were in the place they were in, and that they were in the time they were in, the era they were in. So my feeling like, how could these people not have talked about this, and how could they have raised these children this way? I'm just going to assume that they were doing the best they could, and that nobody wants this. And so nobody asks and wants to live a life of, so if you can erase it by just not talking about it, then let's do that. That's what I think was happening, but but in terms of the place of love, it just was much easier for me because I love the people who are part of the book, and it just wasn't going to help for me to just stew in the feelings that the sadness and the anger. It just wasn't serving. I don't think I would have had the healing that I had.
I would suggest that writing memoir is always an act of love because you're paying such close attention to the details of lives. I'm sure Marty would be glad to chat with you individually. For now, I think I'm going to thank you so much, and I'm going to turn this over to Linda.
Thank you, Linda.
I just want to say, Marty, thank you for an extraordinary memoir and for being so generous with all of us here. And Lee, you're a great conversation partner and a great writer, and everything, I agree with Marty, everything Lee writes is fabulous, so find it. There's going to be a book signing upstairs. If you go up these stairs here and through the door, one more flight, and come through the door, Marty will be there to sign books for you. Thank you so much for being here, and have a good evening.